Here is the recap of all 5 seasons of You series. A man named Joe works as a manager at a bookstore. As a child, he grew up in an orphanage, and when he ran away from there, he was picked up by the owner of the store, Mr. Mooney. The man instilled in Joe a love of books and taught him everything he knows. However, the old man acted rather harshly. He repeatedly locked the teenager in his basement in a special plexiglass cube where he stored old books. When Mooney became incapacitated, Joe started running the store. One day, an attractive woman, Beck, walks in, and Joe instantly falls in love with her. He starts spying on her both on social media and in real life. Soon the guy even sneaks into her house and steals her underwear as a trophy. A few days later, Joe sees Beck coming home drunk. She falls on the subway tracks. The main character rescues her and walks her home. However, he manages to steal her cell phone. The woman buys a new one, but does not disable synchronization, because of which Joe gets full access to her messages and profiles in social networks. Soon the main character learns that Beck is dating Benji, who in his opinion is not worthy of her. He lures Benji into a trap and locks him in the very same glass cube. Joe doesn't want to kill him, but he can't let him out. He finds some dirt on the prisoner. It turns out that several years ago Benji accidentally killed a man, but no one found out about it. Joe at first thinks that this information will allow them to part peacefully, as now they both have dirt on each other. However, Benji says some bad things about Beck. Joe can't stand it and kills the guy. After that, he knocks his teeth out and burns the body in the woods. Meanwhile, Beck revisits Joe at the bookstore to thank her for saving him. Being a skillful manipulator, he makes Beck fall in love with him, and they start dating. She introduces him to her rich friends, one of whom, named Peach, does not trust Joe. Meanwhile, Beck is studying at university and dreams of becoming a writer, but Peach thinks that she should drop everything and just start writing, and she will provide the money. However, Beck doesn't want to depend on her friend. Eventually, Beck discovers that Peach doesn't really believe in her, and the women fight. However, that same evening, Peach tries to end her life, and Beck with Joe rush to her. The main character realizes that none of this is real and Peach is just manipulating her friend. The next day on a jog, Joe follows her and hits her over the head with a rock and runs away. Peach surprisingly survives and begins to suspect Joe. In turn, the main character learns that the woman is actually in love with Beck and wants to possess her. A few days later, the friends go to the countryside, where Peach seduces Beck and then offers her to go to live in Europe. Beck refuses and leaves, and Joe, who has arrived there, accidentally kills Peach, making it look like a suicide. After that, the main characters become closer, and Joe seems to have achieved his goal, but after a month, Beck distances herself. After reading the messages in her phone, the guy suspects that she is cheating on him with an attractive therapist and tries to bring her out into the open, but it only makes things worse, because of which they break up. However, Joe does not intend to let it all go and continues to follow Beck, hoping to make her fall in love with him again. Throughout the season, the main character tries to help his neighbor, a little boy, Paco. His stepfather constantly beats his mother, and Joe is afraid that the kid might do something stupid that will get him sent to an orphanage. Eventually, Joe kills the man and disposes of the corpse. After that, the neighbor and Paco leave the apartment. A new neighbor begins to show interest in Joe and they get together. 3 months later, Beck, watching her ex on social networks, is jealous of him. The guy gets his way, and the woman admits that she wants to be with him. However, when they get back together, Beck learns that Joe's past is not as rosy as it may seem. It turns out that before he met her, he was in love with Candace. She cheated on him with some guy, and then suddenly disappeared. Beck tries to figure out what happened to her, but Joe makes a convincing argument. Candace decided to leave everything behind and run away to Europe. At the same moment, we're shown the past. It turns out that Joe, out of jealousy, pushed off the roof of the guy with whom Candace cheated on him, but what happened to the woman we are not shown. Joe once again reads the messages of his beloved and realizes that she really cheated on him with a psychologist. Soon, Beck finds in his apartment a box with souvenirs that Joe left after each murder and realizes who he really is. The guy finds out and locks Beck in a glass cube. He tries to convince her that he only killed bad people and shows her proof. The woman, to get out, offers to blame it all on her psychologist and even spells out a whole story on that topic. But when Joe unlocks the door, Beck breaks free, which forces the main character to kill his beloved. Taking advantage of Beck's plan, he frames the psychologist by burying the body on his property, and he is sent to prison. A few months pass, and on the shelves of the bookstore appears a work written on Beck's story by her friend. Joe thinks that everything is settled, but suddenly Candace, his missing ex, comes into the store and says that they need to discuss some unfinished business. This is the end of the first season. Candace shows up at Joe's bookstore and tells him that she's going to make the main character's life a living hell. It turns out that in the past, a woman tried to leave him, but the guy got angry and decided to take her to the woods to convince her to stay. However, in a scuffle, kills her, at least he thought so. After burying the corpse in the woods, he leaves, but Candace comes to her senses and goes to the nearest police station. Unfortunately, the police can't do anything, as she has no proof. Moreover, she is a drug addict and has a record with the police, so she simply hides for a while to find a way to get revenge on Joe. The main character realizes that Candace could really put him in jail. He decides to leave everything and goes to Los Angeles. While trying to find fake IDs, he meets Will. When he finds out that Will has a full-fledged fake identity, he knocks him out and takes all the documents for himself. Joe rents a warehouse, assembles the familiar plexiglass cube, and locks Will inside. He doesn't want to kill him and tries to figure out how to free the guy so he won't turn him in. Eventually, Joe decides to take a risk and lets Will go, and the guy doesn't turn him in and even becomes his friend. Meanwhile, Joe falls in love at first sight with a woman named Love and cunningly gets a job at the Anavrin store. It turns out that Love and her twin 40 are the owners of the store. Joe also finds a place to live in her neighborhood and uses a telescope to watch for her. Plus, we learn that Love used to have a husband she loved very much, but he got cancer and died soon after. A couple days later, the main character is found by a bandit to whom Will owes money, and since Joe uses his identity, the debt is owed to him. Eventually, he kills the bandit and grinds him into mincemeat in the Anavrin store. After a while, through charm and manipulation, Joe makes Love fall in love with him. Unfortunately, between them is always her twin brother 40. He is a former drug addict who at any moment can snap because of what Love constantly takes care of him. Joe has to befriend 40 to keep him close and in control. One day at a party, the guy goes overboard with substances and makes a scene. Joe wants to calm him down and they are caught on camera, after which this clip ends up on the net. Soon Candace sees it and figures out where the main character lives. She gains 40's trust and becomes his girlfriend, after which she shocks Joe with her appearance. She slips 40 a book about Beck, Joe's previous girlfriend, but since she has no direct evidence, she doesn't tell him that she knows him. Love, being the daughter of rich parents, hires a detective to investigate Candace and soon learns that she is not who she says she is. Candace tells Love the truth about Joe, but she doesn't believe her, as the detective found out that she spent some time in an asylum. Love gives Candace a lot of money to make her disappear from their lives. She agrees, but secretly continues to text 40. In the evening, Love informs Joe that she found out that he hid his real name and also deceived her. The main character manages to convince the woman that Candace is crazy, but does not deny that he hid his real name from her. After that, the main characters break up, but 40 still continues to be friends with him. We also learn Joe's past. When he was a child, his stepfather beat his mother, and notwithstanding, the boy shot the man. His mother abandoned her son, and he was sent to an orphanage where he was bullied by his peers. Joe meets his neighbor Ellie, a 15-year-old teenage girl. Her older sister Delilah, being a reporter, notices something strange about Joe, but still starts to communicate with him. She tells him that when she was 17, the famous comedian Henderson put something in her drink, and she woke up half naked. She has no proof, but she wants to get the man out. Soon it turns out that her sister Ellie hangs out with this comedian, and Joe tries to keep her from Delilah's fate. The main character sneaks into his basement and discovers hidden photos of naked teenagers. Joe kidnaps Henderson and tries to get a confession on camera, but something goes wrong and he kills him. Afterwards, he fakes the whole thing as a suicide. However, at that moment, Ellie was in the house, and the police began to suspect the teenager. Soon, neighbor Delilah falls in love with Joe, and they begin dating. However, she begins to suspect him of killing comedian Henderson. She finds the keys to the warehouse and sneaks in and realizes that Joe is a total psycho. At that moment, the main character comes in and locks the woman in a glass cube. He doesn't want to kill her and promises to let her go as soon as he leaves the country, realizing that she will turn him into the police anyway. Trying to finish all his business, Joe meets with 40, and he arranges a fake kidnapping, then slips the main character a strong hallucinogen. He is glitchy all evening, and half the night he doesn't remember. When he returns to the warehouse the next morning, he sees Delilah dead and thinks he killed her. A short time later, Candace finds the warehouse and manages to lock Joe inside with the corpse. She then calls Love and asks her to come here. However, Love arrives, kills Candace, and gets rid of the corpse. Then she tells Joe what happened. It turns out that yesterday Love found the place and found Delilah chained up. She killed the woman because she loves the main character and is ready to accept him as anything. She tells Joe that when she was a teenager, she killed the maid who molested her brother, but their rich parents hushed up the case. Love comes up with a plan to get them out of this whole mess. It's pretty messy, but roughly speaking, she wants to frame teenage Ellie. Joe realizes that Love is crazy and wants to kill her, but the woman reports that she is pregnant and the main character decides to spare her. Soon he finds Ellie, tells her the fate of her sister, and begs her to run away, as no one will believe her anyway, and Love's family can make her life unbearable. Plus, the woman has no family and will be sent to an orphanage at best. He then gives her the money he stole from Anavrin, and Ellie flees the city. Meanwhile, 40, after reading a book about Beck and getting clues from Candace, guesses that it was Joe who actually killed the ex. He goes to New York and meets the very psychologist who confirms that it was the main character. Back in Los Angeles, he tries to bring Joe out, not knowing that Love is aware of everything. 40 pulls a gun on the main character, but at that moment, a cop shows up and kills the guy. Soon, Joe and Love move to a wealthy suburb where they plan to raise their child. However, Joe's obsession manifests itself again, and this time, he falls in love with their neighbor. This is the end of the second season. A few months pass and a son is born to the main characters. They are incredibly tired of taking care of him, which makes them drift apart. Joe periodically sends money to Ellie, trying to help her. Meanwhile, Joe's obsession has gone nowhere, and he is still in love with their neighbor named Natalie. She has a husband who is the head of a large IT company. But the woman notices Joe's attraction to her. Inviting him for a glass of wine, she wants to sleep with him. But the main character refuses as he is still hoping for a normal relationship with Love. Meanwhile, Love is about to open a bakery and soon learns that her husband is obsessed with the woman next door. She asks Natalie to look for business premises for her, and when she goes into the basement with her, she bludgeons the woman to death with an axe. Love tells Joe everything, and together they have to dispose of the corpse. They then open a bakery and build a plexiglass cube in the basement just in case. At first, their relationship is full of color and passion again, but soon Joe falls in love again, this time with the librarian Marianne. Natalie's disappearance attracts too much attention from the press and the police, so the main characters decide to frame someone for what happened. Suddenly, their son falls ill with measles, and Joe learns that the cause is their anti-vaccination acquaintances. The main character in a rage knocks the man out and locks him in a glass cube. He then tries to get dirt on him. Eventually, he finds it, causing the man to end his life right in their basement. Joe and Love realize it's the perfect chance to dump the blame on him. They succeed, but Natalie's husband Matthew doubts this version. Having received with the help of a hacker records from all the surveillance cameras of the city, he begins to suspect the main characters. Meanwhile, Matthew's son Theo falls in love with Love and they even sleep together. He is crazy about her, but she asks him to forget what happened between them. In turn, Joe gets a job at the library and slowly makes a move on Marianne. They kiss, but the woman does not want to destroy their marriage, so she keeps her distance. Joe learns that his new lover has a daughter. However, her ex-husband Ryan has taken custody away from her because of his connections, even though he doesn't really care about the child and is a total asshole in general. After which, Joe decides to kill Ryan in order to get Marianne's daughter back. Also soon, Love's drunken mother tells Joe that her daughter's ex-husband didn't die of cancer, implying that Love killed him for some reason. Love is madly in love with Joe and is ready to do anything to make him feel for her again. She still has no idea about his new lover. After consulting with Joe, Love arranges a gangbang with her friend Sherry and her husband, hoping that this will bring passion to their relationship. However, Joe hopes it will ruin their marriage, as he intends to break up with Love. During the event, Love is unable to see him with another woman. After going downstairs and arguing with Joe, she utters the phrase, "I killed Natalie," too loudly, and it is heard by their guests. The main characters have to knock them both out and lock them in a glass cube. Joe meets with Marianne and tells her that he is going to break up with Love, after which they sleep together. In the evening, Joe tracks down her ex-husband and kills him, framing the whole thing as a failed robbery. Meanwhile, Love gives the couple in the basement a gun and informs them that only one of them can get out. One of them has to shoot the other. Thus, Love wants to set it up as a murder, and then a suicide. Soon the couple quarrel and even injure each other, but eventually make peace. Meanwhile, Theo finds his father has footage from video cameras around the city and notices Joe fighting with Love on one. He then realizes that Natalie was most likely killed by the main character. He rushes to Love's bakery to rescue her and runs away with her somewhere. However, upon entering the diner, he hears a gunshot and goes down to the basement where he finds Sherry and her husband in a glass cube. The guy goes upstairs and tries to find the keys to the cell, but is met by Love, and she knocks him out with a fire extinguisher. Then the guy falls down the stairs and the woman thinks she killed him. Love tells Joe that she killed Theo, and her husband goes to the bakery. Suddenly it turns out that the guy is alive, and Joe sends him to the hospital, having already decided that today he will leave this city with Marianne. At this time, Love guesses that her husband is obsessed with a new woman and meets him with dinner. Joe asks for a divorce, and when he sees his wife acting strangely, hides a knife under the table. But Love saw this coming and greased the dinnerware with a poison called aconite, which paralyzes Joe. The woman admits that she did kill her ex-husband when he tried to leave her. In fact, she wanted to cripple him so she could be there for him at all times, but she overdid it and he died. Love has to leave so that she is not suspected, and at that moment Matthew enters the house and Joe explains to him that Theo is in the hospital. The man realizes that it was Love who killed his wife, but goes to the hospital to get his son. Love arrives back and lures Marianne into the house, intending to kill her in front of Joe. However, she has come with her daughter, and Love cannot commit such a heartless act. But he tells her that Joe has been deceiving her and she, upset, soon leaves for France. Love is going to kill her husband, but it turns out that he also foresaw this outcome, and knew that she has this poison. So he took an antidote before dinner, which finally works. He injects her with aconite and Love dies in agony. Then he chops off 2 of his fingers and makes it look like his wife killed him. On her behalf, he sends an email to everyone in town where she confesses. Then he sets the house on fire, getting rid of the rest of the evidence. Joe slips his son under the door of Dante, a good-natured colleague at work, intending to pick him up after a while. Meanwhile, he escapes to Paris in the hope of finding Marianne. This is the end of the 3rd season. Joe searches for Marianne in Paris for a long time and eventually learns that she has gone to London for an art exhibition. When they meet, the woman runs away in fear, but Joe manages to catch up with her. Marianne puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that it was Joe who killed his wife by faking her death. She believes that the maniac came to kill her, but the main character says that he will prove his love to her. So he lets her go. On the same day, he is contacted by an assassin, sent by the father of his late wife Love. The man says he was ordered to kill Joe, but he wants to quit, so gives him a fake ID and tells him to lay low for good. but orders him to get rid of Marianne since she's the only one who knows Joe is alive. Instead, he steals Marianne's necklace and sends a picture of it to an assassin to make it look like he's gotten rid of her. Some time passes and Joe lives in London under a fake name. He teaches literature at the university, and at first glance is even happy. In the apartment across the street lives his colleague Malcolm, with his girlfriend Kate. One day, Joe saves her from robbers on the street, and Malcolm, in gratitude, invites him to a party at an elite club for the rich. There he meets a company of people who know each other. Most treat him with disdain, but a few were interested in his appearance. Rhys Montrose, a writer and candidate for mayor of London, has a hearty chat with Joe, and Lady Phoebe began to consider him her soulmate. Soon he gets drunk, and Malcolm drives him home. In the morning, Joe wakes up and finds the corpse of his neighbor in his kitchen, and notices that he is missing one finger. The main character thinks that he killed him, as Malcolm always annoyed Joe. He has no time to think about it, so he takes the body out of town and gets rid of it. No one notices Malcolm's disappearance at first. Soon, Kate invites Joe to dinner with the same group. Suddenly, he receives an encrypted message in which the real killer of Malcolm thanks him for getting rid of the evidence. The main character realizes that it was done by one of these people now sitting at the table with him. Soon, Joe infiltrates the dead man's office looking for clues, and finds a notebook in which he discovers dirt on the artist Simon. This could prove to be the motive, so Joe begins to suspect him. Just then, Simon is having an exhibition curated by Kate. Joe wants to follow the artist after the event, but falls asleep outside. However, suddenly, he hears approaching police cars. The main character sneaks inside unnoticed and discovers Simon's corpse with his ear cut off. Joe returns home and sees newspaper clippings from his past on the wall. The killer has already figured out the main character's real identity. From him comes another message, where he orders Joe to kill Kate, otherwise he will tell everyone about his past. The murderer sends Malcolm's finger to the press, so everyone learns of his death and thinks that a maniac has appeared in town, preying only on the rich. Joe tries to keep Kate safe and follows her around. At first, the woman is very rude to the intrusive Joe, but after the funeral, she softens up and sleeps with him. Joe continues to follow her and is spotted by Lady Phoebe's guard. He searches for the man and finds Malcolm's ring. The main character does not understand how it could be in his pocket, and to save himself, he has to kill the guard. After that, he buries it in the cemetery. The real killer gets in touch with Joe and thinks he actually enjoys killing. The main character disagrees with him, but decides to play along in order to track him down. Lady Phoebe invites Joe to her country estate, where the other characters are also due to arrive. There, he wants to continue his investigation, and at the same time tries to distance himself from Kate, so as not to provoke his obsession. However, it doesn't work out for him. Later, Kate tells Joe that her father is a very rich man with incredible influence. She broke off all relations with him, as his business is a real evil. At night, while everyone is resting, Joe hears her scream and runs into her room, where he finds Kate with a knife in her hands over the body of one of her acquaintances. The main character at first thinks that she is the murderer, but it turns out the woman found her like this. Surprisingly, Kate calmly took Joe's suggestion to get rid of the evidence. Then he tells her about finding Malcolm's corpse in his apartment a while back after that very party. Someone wanted to frame him, and now Kate. Joe hides the dead woman's corpse in the basement. However, it is noticed by one of the guests named Roald. He tells the rest of the party, but they are too drunk to do anything about it. Joe tries to explain himself, but Roald doesn't listen to him. He gives Joe a few seconds head start, and then chases after him with a shotgun. Eventually, Joe manages to knock out Roald, but Rhys appears and knocks out the main character as well. He comes to his senses in the cellars of the estate, chained up. We learn that Rhys was the killer all along, the same man from the beginning of the season who is running for mayor of London and is a successful writer. He admits that although he's recently become rich himself, he's always hated the rich. The man is convinced that Joe is just like him, so he suggests that they commit murders together. But first, Joe has to prove his sincerity by killing the tied-up Roald. Only then will Reese let him go. Joe refuses, and the killer sets fire to the basement. In the end, he manages to free himself, and even saves Roald. However, he does not tell anyone about Reese, as he wants to get rid of him himself. He also realizes that he has fallen in love with Kate. Soon Reese shows up at Joe's house and forces him to find someone to pin the recent murders on. To do this, he gives Joe the severed ear of a painter. Joe goes to another party and looks for a victim among the rich guests. Just at this time, a crazy lady kidnaps Lady Phoebe. She thinks she's her friend. In fact, she has a vivid case of a parasocial obsession. Eventually, Joe finds out about it and frames this particular woman by planting an ear in her bag. Reese admires the main character's ability to get out of difficult situations and gives the name of the latest victim that Joe has to kill. It is Kate's father named Tom Lockwood, whom she hates so much. Just recently, he called his daughter for dinner and Joe joins them. When Kate goes to the restroom, the man tells her that he knows all about Joe's past. He's not going to do anything about it as he realizes that sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to achieve your goals. Surprisingly, Tom asks Joe to get dirt on Reese as he is interfering with his business. Soon the villain informs Joe that he knows about his arrangement with Tom, so to be on the safe side, he finds Marianne, kidnapped her and locked her in a plexiglass cube in some secret location. If he doesn't take out Tom Lockwood, Reese will kill Marianne. Joe lures Tom out and tries to kill him, but the man guesses what he's up to, so he proposes a trade. If Joe kills Reese, he'll take care of the rest. And Tom gives him the address where the villain is now. Joe goes there and ties Reese up. He starts torturing him to find out Marianne's location. However, he acts as if he doesn't even know who Joe is. Out of anger, the main character kills the man. Suddenly, Reese enters the room, and Joe realizes that in fact the villain he has been communicating with all this time is his hallucination. Turns out after everything that happened in America, Joe's gone cuckoo. At the beginning of the season, he did let Marianne go, but he kidnapped her soon after. Put together a plexiglass cube and locked her in there. We thought the main character's mania was gone, but in reality, he's obsessed with writer Reese Montrose. His personality split. In one, he was still the same Joe who was unaware of Marianne's kidnapping, and the other was Reese, a maniac who enjoyed killing. He was the one who killed all these people earlier, when the first personality fell asleep or passed out. Joe realizes the situation he is in, so he gets rid of the body of the real Reese and returns home. Joe realizes he hid Marianne himself, but can't remember where. Eventually, Reese clues him in, and he finds the woman in an abandoned subway. Turns out some time ago, Reese stopped visiting her and bringing her food. She almost died of starvation and dehydration. Joe tries to open the door but can't remember the password, especially since he realizes that if he lets her go, she'll turn him into the police. So he gives Marianne some food and tells her he'll be back tomorrow with a clear plan. He spends the whole day with Kate, and by evening he realizes that the only way to end it all is if he dies himself. So he returns to the subway, but sees that Marianne has died of an overdose, because Reese left the pills in the cube earlier. The villain's plan was for her to start taking them, and when he let her go, the police thought she was a drug addict and didn't believe her words. A distraught Joe takes Marianne's body to a park bench and leaves. Let's go back a little bit in time. Throughout the season, a student named Nadia begins to suspect that Joe has something to do with the recent murders. She breaks into his apartment and only becomes more convinced of her hunch. She eventually finds an abandoned subway and goes downstairs where she spots Marianne. Nadia wants to call the police, but Marianne won't let her do it, as Joe is a maniac, and even if they arrest him, he'll get out and get to her someday. So they come up with a cunning plan. Nadia changes those very pills to other pills that will slow her heartbeat, and she will fall, roughly speaking, into a coma. Joe will think she's dead and dispose of the body, and Nadia will follow the maniac, and when he leaves, she will inject a special medication that will revive Marianne. The plan succeeds, and after a while the woman returns to her daughter in Paris. Kate learns that although she cut all ties with her father, Tom has been influencing her life all along, and it is thanks to him that she became so successful. Upset, Kate tells Joe about it, and the main character decides to kill Tom. In the end, he succeeds in doing so, while framing his bodyguard. After that, Joe, still suffering from split personality, decides to jump off the bridge. However, he wakes up in the hospital, as he managed to be fished out by rescuers. Kate confesses her love for Joe and informs him that she does not care about his past. The main character tells her absolutely everything, and she calmly accepts it. Meanwhile, Nadia and her boyfriend Edward are trying to find evidence and put Joe behind bars. But the main character is ahead of them. He kills Edward and frames Nadia for the crime. Soon, Joe and Kate return to America. The woman became the heiress of her father's business, and thanks to her influence made it so that Joe was cleared of all charges. Now for the public, the main character is a victim who escaped from the crazy love, having faked his death. This is the end of the 4th season. 3 years have passed since Joe returned to New York with his wife Kate. We learn that the main character has not told his beloved all his sins and made himself look like a victim. He got his son Henry back and purchased the bookstore, but hasn't opened it yet. Joe thinks things are finally looking up. However, he suddenly learns that Kate's uncle named Bob is going to leak to the press what Kate did when she worked with her father back in the day. Also that she was involved in Reese Montrose's death. Joe fantasizes about killing Bob, and to keep from making it a reality, he writes a novel in his old apartment above the bookstore. Kate catches him doing it. At first, the woman was shocked by what she read, but then she realized there was no other way out, and asked her husband to kill Bob. Joe sneaks into his apartment at night, and makes it look like the man killed himself. Kate has 2 sisters, twins Maddie and Reagan. The first is a simple girl, but the second is a real shark who wants to remove Kate from the post of the head of the company. One day, the main characters are called to school, because Henry, Joe's son, hit Reagan's daughter. All because the girl heard her mother calling Kate a murderer. Henry, in turn, heard it at school and decided to stand up for his mom. Now Reagan wants to use this to remove Kate as head of the company. She guesses that the main characters are somehow involved in Bob's death and promises to dig up dirt on them. Joe offers his wife to kill Reagan, but she refuses and begins to suspect that something is wrong with her husband. However, Joe has no intention of letting it all go. So he sneaks into Reagan's office at night, where he catches her with her husband. He quietly locks the man in a back room, knocks the woman out, and locks her in a plexiglass cube in the basement of the bookstore. However, it turns out it's not Reagan, but her twin Maddie, who slept with her husband. Joe tries to figure out what to do now, and after talking to the woman, he finds out. Turns out Maddie has been in her twin's shadow all her life. Reagan treated her shabbily and even forced her to give birth to a daughter for her. Eventually, Joe comes up with a plan. He convinces Maddie to impersonate her sister, whom she hates so much. Afterward, Reagan disappears, and Maddie will get her baby back and take her husband. Meanwhile, Reagan demands that Kate resign herself. It turns out she's already learned that Joe killed Reese Montrose, and Kate is covering for him. She tells her husband about it, and he insists on killing Reagan. However, Kate is against it and begins to fear her husband. The next day, Joe sneaks into Reagan's house and kidnaps her. He also brings her to the basement and demands that Maddie kill her sister. Only after that he will let her out of here. The woman has no choice but to kill Reagan. Soon, at a director's meeting, Maddie pretends to be her sister and announces that she is resigning. Kate thinks that Joe has something to do with it, and the couple quarrels. A little earlier, Joe catches a woman named Bronte in the bookstore, who sometimes sleeps here and also reads books. She runs away, but later shows up there again. Joe decides to help her and offers her a job at this store. After that, they start to prepare the bookstore for opening. Because Kate has begun to distance herself from her husband, Joe slowly falls in love with Bronte, but still resists his feelings. One day, she invites Joe to a literary center where she introduces him to her friends. There, she also runs into Clayton, her abusive ex. He ridicules her and informs Joe that her name is actually Louise. So as not to confuse you, I will continue to call her Bronte. However, this does not hurt the main character. On the contrary, it only intensifies his feelings for her. A little later, Bronte finds Joe's manuscript, where he fantasizes about murders and also about her. Soon they open a store, and her ex Clayton arrives there and once again behaves aggressively towards Bronte. Joe stands up for her, and the woman reacts strangely to this. However, that same evening feelings flare up between them, and they sleep together. Kate hires detectives and realizes that Joe has actually killed all of his exes. She also learns that he is cheating on her with Bronte. Soon Kate breaks into Reagan's house to talk and discovers that it's actually Maddie. She tells her that it was Joe who forced her to kill her sister. Kate doesn't know what to do, as turning Joe into the police will drag both her and Maddie down with him. Meanwhile, Joe finds a note from Bronte saying that she can't take it anymore and says goodbye to him. The main character doesn't understand what's going on and thinks her ex Clayton is somehow involved. Eventually, Joe tracks Bronte down and she reacts strangely to him again. They spend the night together, and in the morning Joe hears Clayton bursting into the house and yelling at his ex. Joe rushes to the rescue and kills the man. Suddenly her friends burst in, who are live streaming the murder. Joe is arrested but is released on bail thanks to Kate's lawyers. A detective is questioning Bronte. Turns out she was a student and friend of Beck's. When she died and her book appeared, Bronte began to guess that someone actually finished it. Soon she comes upon a group of like-minded people who are convinced that actually Beck was killed by Joe, as well as some other people. Clayton is in fact the son of the very same psychologist who was framed by the main character in Season 1. Together they plan to bring Joe out into the open, but it's not easy to approach him, as he is now the husband of one of the richest women in the world. Bronte decides to take a chance and sneaks into his bookstore. Things took a turn and she truly fell in love with Joe. She became convinced that he couldn't have killed anyone and tried to convince her friends of this. Except they disagreed. Clayton decided to act harder. He set it up so that Joe would try to kill Bronte in a fit of jealousy and record it on hidden cameras in the house. Things got out of hand, and Clayton died himself. Bronte tells the detective that Joe killed him in self-defense, but she is hesitant to return to her lover out of shame. Joe learns that Kate tricked him into signing custody papers. She takes his son Henry and won't even let him see him. Joe is furious, and he ends up giving an interview where he tells his version of events. Suddenly he receives a message from Bronte in which she says that she told the detectives the truth. Specifically, that he killed Clayton in self-defense. Joe realizes that Bronte still loves him and tries to find her. Except that's when a group of online misogynists start harassing her online. One man tries to kidnap Bronte, but Joe manages to save his beloved. The woman comes to her senses, and the main character decides to share something personal with her. He tells her that killing is a part of him, but he only kills those who deserve it. Joe takes her to the basement where her kidnapper is already locked up. He says he'll do whatever she wants to him, even let him go if that's what she wants. In the end, Bronte decides to let him go. She says that Joe doesn't need to kill for her, it's enough for her to know that he intends to protect her. The main character agrees, however later still kills this misogynist. Kate goes to London and visits Nadia in prison. She wants to get her out of there since she realized what she has done. Kate also learns that it was Joe who killed her ex Malcolm and her other friends in the previous season. Together they realize that the only way out is to kill Joe. Meanwhile, Maddie impersonates her sister, causing her to go cuckoo. Soon Harrison, Reagan's husband, guesses who is in front of him, and Maddie has to confess everything. After which she knocks him out and calls Joe. The main character manipulates Harrison and convinces him to keep quiet about the fact that his ex-wife is dead, so that he can live happily with Maddie. However, Joe realizes that Harrison will turn him in sooner or later, so he decides to play it safe and frames the man for Reagan's death, which lands him and Maddie in jail. The next step is to kill Kate, who by this time has emptied all his accounts and won't give back his son Henry. Joe tracks her down, but it turns out to be a trap and the main character gets knocked out. Joe regains consciousness in a plexiglass cube in a bookstore. Kate and Nadia demand that he confess to his crimes, and then they'll let him go. What they really need is this confession to exonerate Maddie. Marianne suddenly appears, and Joe is shocked as he thought she was dead. In talking to her, he realizes that the women will kill him anyway. Meanwhile, Bronte notices Marianne in the store. The woman knows who she is, so she is surprised by her presence. Marianne convinces Bronte that Joe is actually a villain and has been messing with her mind. Soon, Kate decides to kill the main character herself and goes down to the basement. However, it turns out that Joe foresaw that he could be locked in the cube, and even someone found a spare key. So he sewed another key into his hand. The man gets free and injures Kate. They both lie down without strength, and Joe confesses to the murders. This confession Kate records on a recorder and sends it to Nadia. At this time, Maddie is released as Harrison has taken all the blame. A woman comes into the bookstore and sets it on fire. Bronte notices this and goes down into the basement. She finds Kate's breathless body, but decides to save Joe. The couple intends to escape from America, and Joe thinks he's finally found his true love. But it turns out Bronte saved him to put him in prison. On the way, they break into some country house and decide to spend the night there. During the night, a woman pulls a gun on him and demands that he confess to killing Beck. She also demands that he cross out of the book all the points he completed for her. Afterward, a fight ensues, during which Joe drowns the woman in the lake. He hears the police approaching and goes on the run. Joe even kills one officer to get away. Suddenly he meets Bronte, who is not dead after all. Joe asks her to shoot him, but the woman doesn't want him to die so easily. She shoots him between his legs, after which he is caught by the police. Some time passes. Bronte republished Beck's book and continued to live an ordinary life. Marianne began to paint pictures. Kate survived, resigned, and began supporting aspiring artists as she had always dreamed of doing. Harrison and Maddie are free and living together. Nadia became a writer and helps women in prison. And Joe, on the other hand, is given a life sentence. He sits in solitary confinement and receives endless letters from his female fans. This is the end of the 5th season. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the like button. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.